Greetings and welcome, friends. It's great to have you here. And we are excited to begin our program for the night. I'm Amy Antonucci. I am the chair of the board of the New Hampshire Peace Action Education Fund. This is Monday, January 9th, 2026. Been struggling with that this year. Some years I get it, some years I don't. And our topic for the night is National Peace Action Priorities. Kevin Martin is joining us. He is the president of Peace Action and of the Peace Action Education Fund. Before I pass it on to him, I have a few things to remind folks about. If you're new to the call, to our group, just want to let you know that it has been more than 40 years that New Hampshire Peace Action has been educating, mobilizing, and organizing to build a more peaceful and just future for all. We'd like to, in that same spirit of respect, start with an acknowledgement that here in New Hampshire, we do our work on the traditional ancestral homeland of the Abenaki, Wabanaki, and Pennacook peoples, past and present. Quick reminder that we love when you have your video on. We are recording it, so no, you might not want to, but we will definitely have everyone's audio muted to start with. Later on, we will be doing some Q&A, including hand raising, and the chat will be open the whole time for your questions. Although we'll probably hold them until that Q&A period like we usually do. So I'm really pleased to introduce tonight's speaker, Kevin Martin. Kevin joined the Peace Action staff on September 4th, 2001. He was previously the Director of Project Abolition. He was Executive Director of Illinois Peace Action and Director of Community Outreach Canvassing for Peace Action back when it was called Sane or Freeze in DC. Kevin travels all around the world representing peace action in the U.S. peace movement. He's been to Japan, Russia, China, Mexico, France, Germany, and New Hampshire. He is a great colleague and friend to New Hampshire Peace Action. We're really grateful for the advice and help that he gives to us. And we're really thrilled to have him here tonight to talk about what National is planning for this coming year and how New Hampshire can connect to that work. So I'm going to turn it over to Kevin. Join me in a visible welcome if you can, and take it away, Kevin.
Thank you, Amy and Doreen, and all the wonderful supporters of New Hampshire Peace Action. I want to start by saying when Amy and I were talking about this, what in the world should I focus on? Because our agenda is so broad. The scope of our resistance is so broad and deep. And Amy knows this, and the rest of you can maybe find out about this soon, that National Peace Action works with our affiliates around the country and our supporters on campaign plans for the year. And there are 5 this year. And I'm not going to attempt to encapsulate all 5. And I'm not going to try to address every single issue we're working on. However, if there are issues you feel are important that I don't address, you can feel free to raise those in the question and answer period. So I want to do a little bit of audience participation to start with. And it's okay if you want to unmute people just for this particular question. And the question is, how many countries has Trump attacked since his recrudescence? Recrudescence is a great word. If you don't know what that means, it means the return of something awful, the unwanted return of something awful. So the question is, again, how many countries has Trump attacked in his second term?
I'm going to suggest people either use the chat or fingers.
Okay. You can name the countries.
I see 2 fingers up with someone. I think I see someone's got 10 up there. Is that Peter? Yeah.
These are all good guesses.
Let's see, what have we got?
So if you Google this, the answer you get will be 7. And those 7 are Iran, Iraq, Nigeria on Christmas. We bombed Nigeria on Christmas, Syria, Somalia, Yemen, Venezuela. Those are 7. But I would add another. And again, I use the word attacked, not bombed. And the 8th country that he's attacking is the United States of America. And that is certainly happening right now in Minnesota. He is attacking the rule of law, the Constitution, international law. And I'm going to talk a little bit about, and this is part of what I think is important about, I talked about the 5 different campaigns that we're working on for this year, that there's synergy and overlap between a number of those. And I've been particularly struck by the horror of what's been going on in Minnesota. I haven't heard as much about Maine, and maybe all of you have since you're neighbors to the state of Maine in terms of the ICE surge and presence there. But I wanted to read something. I've been getting sort of private messages from friends of mine in Minnesota, which have been amazing to me to learn about the resistance and how people are organizing there. But I wanted to read something because I reached out to a leader I'm not going to name. And this is somebody who is part of our associate group, not an affiliate group, but an associate group in Minnesota. And they wrote, I thought I knew this place. After all, I've lived here for 50 years, but I had no idea of the strength of the potential for solidarity. Like any city, Minneapolis has struggled to coalesce. During the 2008 Republican convention in St. Paul, we split over tactics and the definition of nonviolence. After George Floyd, we couldn't agree on how to move forward. This is totally different. The unity is complete, the dedication limitless. We grow stronger every day. I'm constantly brought to tears by the gratitude, grace, and love shown by the incredible art and music and the power of our organizing. Each person works to find their role and then keeps performing it. It's true that any human would likely try to do what we are doing, but because of past trauma, we've already got the infrastructure to connect, sign up for patrols, and quickly respond to attacks. If they think we're likely to give up, as Robert Arnold says, defiance until death. And then they went on to post a link for me, which I'm not going to post right now, but I could later, about the strength and the parallels to other acts of resistance. And they specifically referred to an article that talks about the similarities between Minnesota and Gaza or Palestine. And that is something, again, that I think is important in terms of the synergy or the overlap of the issues that Peace Action works on and the campaigns that we work on. And many of you may know a fair bit about this, but I just saw an article today that I've been thinking about, but this sort of reminded me that the United States, and especially ICE and the CPB, are using tactics and surveillance tools that have been developed by Israel in the ongoing oppression and apartheid and genocide against the Palestinian people. And that's not a coincidence that the United States is using a lot of those tactics. And of course, in a way, I guess if you were going to be cynical, you could say, well, that's a good return on our investment for the billions and billions and billions of dollars the United States has given Israel in terms of military aid and weaponry. But I do think it's important to be able to understand the connections between these struggles. So I was grateful to see that. She sent me that. Speaking of Israel and Palestine, and I'm going to pivot in a minute to Iran, and these are related in terms of regional tensions. And as I said, of the 7 countries that Trump has attacked, 8 if you include the United States, which, by the way, as a resident just outside Washington, D.C., the attacks that he's done on the White House itself, demolishing the east wing of the White House on a whim to build this ridiculous gold-plated ballroom, the attack on the Kennedy Center, putting his name on the Kennedy Center along with John Kennedy's, is just galling beyond belief. And these don't make the top 100 of Trump's crimes, right? But they are horrible as well. So people here in Washington, and the National Guard deployment, which continues in Washington, totally unnecessary and ridiculous. So I feel like our capital, where I live, or just outside I live just outside, is also under attack. In terms of Israel and Palestine, Netanyahu is supposed to be at the White House tomorrow to meet with Trump to make sure that Trump is on the same page as he is in terms of Israel's interests regarding Iran. And again, remember last June, two nuclear states, Israel, unacknowledged, but everybody knows they have nuclear weapons, and the United States, attacked a non-nuclear state, Iran, over its purported desire to have nuclear weapons. Of course, Iran does not have nuclear weapons, and this is all Trump's problem in the first place because he abrogated, tore up the treaty, or not the treaty, the JCPOA, Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, negotiated by his nemesis, Obama, because he has to undo everything Obama did. And of course, you saw the horribly racist post that he did of Barack Obama and Michelle Obama just over the weekend. Just disgusting. But, you know, it's Trump, so you can't be surprised. He's always been racist. And that agreement, which had not just, it wasn't just bilateral between the United States and Iran, and many of you worked on this years ago, that agreement had capped effectively Iran's nuclear program short of the ability to develop nuclear weapons. They've gotten closer, but they still say they don't want nuclear weapons, and there are a lot of incentives for them not to have nuclear weapons. But just reminding us that last June, that illegal attack by two nuclear weapon states against a non-nuclear state occurred. And now Trump, of course, is talking about, well, we have an armada ready to attack, but they were supposedly negotiating with Iran. And Steve Witkoff, the envoy for everything, he's the negotiator for everything, was supposed to have been meeting with Iranian officials. Now, the Iranian officials, this was last Friday, after that meeting, the Iranian officials did not seem to be very pleased with the outcome and said they don't know when there will be another round of talks. So Netanyahu coming to the White House tomorrow on short notice to meet with Trump is very concerning. Now, of course, what has gotten lost is the ongoing genocide in Gaza and the ongoing occupation and intensifying pressure in the West Bank. So peace action and our allies are going to have to continue to work on that issue to stop further weapons transfers. Just last week, 6.5 billion in weapons transfers were announced to Israel, and an even larger amount, I think it was 8 billion, to Saudi Arabia. So we're hoping and working with congressional allies, particularly in the Senate, to see if they will introduce joint resolutions of disapproval to work to stop those specific weapons transfers. The one that's probably the worst to Israel, or well, they're all bad, but Apache helicopters and assault vehicles. And those are two of the most deadly weapons in that package. Of course, also stopping this cockamamie board of peace that Trump is talking about, the ethnic cleansing of Gaza, Gaza without Gazans, to build this Mar-a-Lago on the Mediterranean. We're going to have to try to stop that as well. So our resistance in terms of Trump's policies, and of course Biden was bad enough, but Trump is even worse in terms of support for genocide and ongoing apartheid in Israel, that is going to have to continue. In terms of Iran, we did have a vote last year, I believe it was after the illegal attacks, and some of the same senators, and especially the two main co-sponsors, are looking at an Iran war powers resolution to get the Senate to vote against a further attack on Iran. That's Tim Kaine from Virginia and Rand Paul from Kentucky. And they have a new war powers resolution, SJ Res 104, which I can put the link to that in the chat in a little while. And we're going to be sending out an action alert on this tomorrow. And we certainly want New Hampshire's two senators to be supporting this, as they should. Now, a couple of things I want to talk about that are sort of related in terms of the difficulty that we're facing on these issues, but also the progress we've been making. On weapons sales to Israel, the United States, and the original reporting on this was last fall, that Netanyahu was going to ask for not a 10-year commitment, but a 20-year commitment, doubling the quote-unquote business as usual commitment, which has been, it was negotiated last one under Obama, $3.8 billion per year for a decade. Of course, we've given much more than that, especially since October 7th of 2023. The United States has given, I think, 30 billion in weapons to Israel. But they were looking at either a 10 or possibly 20-year memorandum of understanding, MOU as they call it, and they were talking about doubling the amount of money to close to 8 billion a year. Now the reporting is that they have backed off on that, and we should take that as a sign of progress and that our work is making a difference. They're talking about instead Israel being more self-reliant and doing co-production with the United States on some of the weapon systems. Israel, of course, is already a large weapons exporter. That gets lost sometimes, that they already export their weapons. The United States is planning to buy cluster munitions from Israel, which are banned under international law. So the intertwining of our two war machines is already despicable and very damaging and dangerous. However, if they do this and they don't want as much military aid from US taxpayers, but this co-production moving toward that, in some ways that actually might be worse. So on the one hand, they're responding to political changes in the United States, especially in the Democratic Party, where only 7%, and I'm surprised it's that high, support what Israel has been doing in Gaza. So if they do this co-production thing, it's possible that Israel would be even less accountable than they already are under US and international law. Not that that has been used to hold Israel accountable, unfortunately, but at least those laws are on the books. And we have various tools that we have pursued with Congress to hold Israel accountable for their horrific actions. If they do this co-production agreement instead, it's possible that our tools that we have to hold them accountable under, especially US law, will be diminished. So we're going to have to keep an eye on that. In terms of Iran, the War Powers Resolution is a tool that we've had to use more often recently than we would like. And of course, it goes back to 1973 in the Vietnam War. And many of you probably remember that. I vaguely remember it. I was young at the time. I remember the Vietnam War. I don't know if I remember the 1973 War Powers Act. On Venezuela, that was very interesting. Of course, that came after the attack. And the first procedural vote, we won in the Senate. It was 53-47. And we actually had 5 Republicans suddenly discovering their spine and voting in favor of the Constitution. It was Collins, Paul, Hawley, Young, and Murkowski. And so it was 53-47, but that was just a procedural vote. The Republicans and the White House especially were so concerned about this that they scrambled together and they got Young and Hawley to undiscover their spines and switch sides and vote on the wrong side on a procedural vote. And the procedural vote was total chicanery, but this is what they can do when they're in the majority, which was to strip the privileged status of the War Powers Resolution. What's really good about the War Powers Resolution, especially in the Senate, it has privileged status, so it can't be blocked by the majority. What they did was they introduced a resolution that said, well, it shouldn't have privileged status anymore because the attack against Venezuela is over and it's not ongoing. And they got Hawley and Young to switch their votes, so it was a 50-50 tie. So they had to hustle J.D. Vance over to the Senate floor to break the tie. And he seemed entirely too excited to be there. He was like a kid on Christmas or something. And he also wasn't sure which way he was actually supposed to vote, because sometimes these votes can be confusing. Is it negatively or positively worded? Like, what am I supposed to do? And he had to ask several of his aides what he was supposed to do. So he did what they wanted, and he broke the tie 51-50. And so that actually killed the War Powers Resolution. We never got to the official substantive vote on it. But again, I think that's a sign of progress, that they had to scramble like that to shut down the real vote. And I'm not going to say we should all be spiking the football in the end zone on something like that. Clearly, no. But the fact that we have seen some political shifts on these two issues, I think is important. One of the things that I want to talk about now is something, and I can post a link in the chat on this as well, that just happened, the death of arms control. So among Trump's crimes and transgressions, I think most people, even progressives, wouldn't say this makes the top 20 or the top 50. But for the first time since 1972, there is no treaty limiting US and Russian nuclear weapons. Of course, that goes back to when it was the Soviet Union, not Russia. First time since 1972. And again, because the New START Treaty, which many of us worked for, many of you worked for, was negotiated by Obama, I always thought in the back of my mind, well, he's going to let this expire because he hates Obama and he's just so childish and small and puny and teeny tiny that he has to do that, right? He can't help himself. So it was concluded in 2010, and under the treaty provisions, it could be extended once for 5 years, which Biden did. However, it expired last Thursday, February 5th. Last September, Russia offered, even though Russia, they said in 2023 that they were no longer felt like they were held to the treaty, they were still observing the key limits of the treaty. The two key limits are 1,550 deployed strategic nuclear warheads on each side, which of course is 1,550 too many. The only proper amount of nuclear weapons in the world is 0, which we of course support, including the Treaty on the Prohibition of Nuclear Weapons, which will have a review conference at the United Nations later this year. That's end of November and beginning of December. And also the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty review conference is coming up even sooner, end of April, beginning of May at the UN. The other limit besides the 1,550 is 700 launchers each. So the Russian proposal was to continue to observe the limits on each side. It was unclear about if they would resume verification, but it would have been at least an easy enough handshake agreement for the Trump administration to say, yes, we will continue to observe this limit. And Russia had initially said 1 year, but then they said it could be longer. But Trump, of course, has let it, not only let it expire, but he has not agreed to this continuation of observing the limits. He could change his mind tomorrow. He could call his buddy Putin and say, okay, you were right, this is stupid. But of course, all the nuclear states, all 9, are working on what's called euphemistically modernization, but really it's an upgrade and an overhaul of the nuclear weapons arsenals of all 9 countries. So it would be bad enough just to say, well, we let New START expire. There are no treaties governing limits on US and Russian nuclear warheads, but we're not in any hurry to increase our nuclear arsenal or to upgrade or quote unquote improve our nuclear weapons. But unfortunately, we are. As part of the quote unquote deal, which was not a deal that we agreed to in peace action, to get New START ratified by the Senate, there was this agreement for what will probably turn out to be more than $2 trillion in upgrades to the nuclear arsenal of the United States. And again, all the other 8 nuclear states are doing that as well. Trump's garbage reason for not agreeing to Russia's proposal at this point, and he can make up whatever excuse he wants to, is that China has to be involved. So China is modernizing and upgrading and increasing its nuclear arsenal, but its nuclear arsenal is still dwarfed by those of the US and Russia. I believe it's only a third or even a quarter. And until fairly recently, their nuclear weapons weren't even very modern. They still had liquid fueled rockets. Now they have solid fuel, but until recently, so that meant that their missiles, their arsenal was not on hair trigger alert the way US and Russia is. It is now, but it wasn't. And they've been very clear that they're not sitting down to negotiate limits on their arsenals when their arsenal is still dwarfed by the United States and Russia. Also, China has made common sense proposals to get rid or to negotiate a treaty to make sure that we don't have weapons in space, and other common sense proposals that have been ignored by the United States and other countries for quite some time. So one of the things that I think we need to do is not only continuing to advocate for a nuclear-free world, and again, Trump could decide at any moment to take Russia up on this offer just for the status quo, like not make things worse, right? The Physicians' Creed, first do no harm. Well, we're doing harm by getting rid of the treaty and contemplating increasing our nuclear arsenal. Trump has also talked about resuming nuclear weapons testing, which the United States has not done since Bill Clinton. Actually, no, since George H.W. Bush was president. We have still worked on nuclear weapons experiments, but not explosive nuclear testing. And Trump sort of tipped his hand on this a little while ago They accuse Russia of doing some low yield, very low yield nuclear weapons explosions, although they haven't produced the evidence on that. And then just the end of last week, they're accusing China of doing that. So that signaled to me that they aren't serious about negotiating. Well, first about observing the new start limits, and then in terms of if there were to be negotiations on a new treaty, even if it's just bilateral between the United States and Russia, that could take years to hammer out everything that's needed, including verification. So I think, unfortunately, it's going to have to wait for the next president, if we get a next president, if we ever have another president, if we ever have another election. I just don't see that Trump is going to do this. And this is where the garbage about he's a peace president and his MAGA base doesn't want foreign wars, et cetera, et cetera. None of us ever believed that. And again, he's attacked 7 or 8 countries since his recrudescence. None of us ever thought he should get a Nobel Peace Prize, which is why I thought it was great to see the people of Minneapolis being nominated. I think it was by The Nation magazine for the Nobel Peace Prize, which I can quibble with. The Nobel Peace Prize is not supposed to be about general peace and justice resistance. It's supposed to be about disarmament, according to Alfred Nobel's establishment of the prize with his estate. But let's not quibble over that right now. So there are going to be a few things that we're going to be focusing on: continuing the call to observe those new start limits, and then opposing the exorbitant, cockamamie, unworkable, never going to work, no matter how much money they throw at it, Golden Dome, for example, the so-called missile defense, and the Sentinel, the new ICBM to replace Minuteman. And the best thing to do as an interim step would be just to scrap the ICBM leg of our triad altogether. It's the most provocative, the most dangerous, the most difficult. None of the aspects of the program work. It's way over budget. It triggered the Nunn-McCurdy law, which means Congress has to, and the Pentagon has to, explain why it's so far over budget. And not only is it so far over budget, they can't get any of the program to work. So we have some good things to go after. I was going to use the word target, but that's not a great word for peace activists to use. We have some great opportunities to chip away at the nuclear weapons enterprise. And of course, again, this is going to be more than $2 trillion in terms of nuclear weapons upgrades and modernization. That brings us to the Pentagon budget, which is already over $1 trillion, and they're talking about trying to get it up to 1.5 trillion. It may be even starting this year, and the Republicans are talking about doing that under the budget reconciliation process, which is totally illegitimate. But again, if they have the votes and the power to do it, they're going to try to ram that through at a time when young people in this country can't afford to buy a car, let alone a house, let alone health insurance. And to say that we now need to spend 1.5 trillion on the Pentagon is just outrageous. So all this adds up to looking like a new nuclear arms race and a new conventional arms race that we absolutely can't afford. But neither can the people of Russia or the people of China or the people of Japan or the people anywhere in the world can afford this. So that is kind of my overview of our policy and legislative agenda. And it's not all. I did touch a little bit on Venezuela, but also China and Ukraine, and who knows the next place that Trump might try to attack. But I wanted to end, and we'll open it up for questions and comments, on something that's less political. So I hope that many of you have been following the wonderful, peaceful perambulation of the monks from Texas, and they're arriving in DC, maybe tonight, I believe. So the next 2 days, they have both some public and private events. And of course, they've been going intentionally through conservative areas. I imagine they thought the weather might be good, but of course, the storms that we've been having in the southern part of the United States and the mid-Atlantic, and you've been having too, have been awful. So they didn't get that. But they have been getting, I think, incredible support and good media publicity for the most part, although they've had some harassment. But my understanding is they intentionally did decide to do this through a conservative part of the country. So tomorrow, in addition to some private events, they're doing a public event at the National Cathedral here in Washington. On Wednesday, they're doing a public event at the Lincoln Memorial, and then processing over to Capitol Hill. And I hope to be at one or more of their events. And I had sort of a harebrained idea. which is that Trump, the publicity hound that he is, and he says he's the peace president, he says he's ended 8 wars, and he wants the Nobel Peace Prize. It's not inconceivable that he might show up. He might crash the monks' events in DC the next 2 days. And my question, and this is for us as peacemakers, not what Trump should do or not what the monks should do. I imagine they would accept him. If he offered to come and address, I imagine they would embrace that or accept that. My question is for us as peace activists. What would we do? Especially somebody like me, if I'm there. What would you counsel me to do if I were there and Trump showed up? Because I think it would test my theory and understanding of nonviolence. Not that I would do something violent to Trump, I wouldn't. But what counts as nonviolent? Does booing him, giving him the middle finger, turning my back on him, trying to stop him from taking the podium bodily, nonviolently? And I think this is where questions of how we act politically for peace and how we understand the path and the pursuit of peace between human beings is sort of an interesting question. So I will let that sit. And any of you who want to comment on what you might do or what you might advise me to do, also with questions or comments on any of the issues that I laid out or issues that I didn't lay out, but that Peace Action is probably working on, I'd be glad to entertain them.
All right. Well, thank you, Kevin. I'm impressed. You got a lot in a pretty short amount of time. Okay, so questions and comments. I'm happy for folks to raise their hand and we'll call on you. There are also some things coming into the chat here. Actually, let me pull one out that it's not quite what the question was, but you did mention before that 7% of Democrats that's the number that still support Israel. I didn't quite get, and there was a question about that. So can you tell me what is that stat and where did it come from if you happen to know?
It was from last fall, and it was particularly about Israel's actions in Gaza.
Okay, and so this was like a public opinion poll.
Yeah. So I just posted 2 things in the chat. The first is the joint resolution, the War Powers resolution on Iran, and then an opinion piece on New START expiration that I had published.
Great. Okay. Let's see. Looking for hands. A lot of ideas, though, Kevin. I don't know if you're reading them or you want me to read out the thoughts people have.
I am, but I guess I'd rather hear people's voices.
Yeah. Okay. So, anyone? Okay, good. Quanta, please go ahead.
Thank you very much. I do think that it would really be helpful to the monks to achieve their purpose by following their examples, because they have been treated bad at some times, and they were very kind, smiling, encouraging, and not responding the way that they were treated. So I think this will be an opportunity for the peace movement to be truly peaceful and avoid doing anything that may appear to be antagonistic or unforgiving. So that's why I wrote the stuff that I did. This is our opportunity to be like Gandhi, to be like Martin Luther King. And nonviolence can mean also being kind. So if we want him to change, then we have to be a model. Thank you very much.
Well, and just to say, Washington is a very progressive city. They will get a fabulous welcome in Washington. My thought experiment, which I admit is very unlikely, is what would happen if Trump decided to crash the party.
Anna, I'm gonna let you unmute. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you. I honestly, what Quanta just spoke and what Evelyn also has in the chat, I really agree with completely. I've been hearing about the monks over time a little bit, have a great deal of respect for what they're doing and taking their lead, even if he shows up. I think that is lovely, what Quanta just voiced, and I think that might be. And then and also what Evelyn said, right? Yeah, and then say and speak out about it afterwards, about what you heard, what you saw, and in that way. But thank you for the opportunity to speak.
Well, and I like the idea about holding up a sign too. I like that. So just to be clear, my own understanding, and I do consider myself to be somewhat Buddhist or Buddhist adjacent. My understanding about peaceful and nonviolence may not be the same as yours. So booing Trump or giving him the finger you may not think is peaceful or kind, but I would consider it to be nonviolent. So that's my understanding. And again, what he is doing, and plus you're assuming that he's a competent mentally person, and he's not. I mean, he clearly is not. So I think my guess is, and I don't know, unless I will be there. It's a question. I don't think he's going to show up, but if he did, I'm not sure how I will react. I certainly wouldn't commit violence against him, no. But again, what he's doing and talking about policy and legislation and whatnot, he's doing immense harm to the world.
We have another.
You all know that. You all know that.
Yeah. Donna, go ahead. 2 Donnas in a row. That's fun.
Hi. My suggestion is basically the same as the other 2 ladies. As much as I despise Trump, first of all, I don't think he'll show up. But even if he did, I think it would be more respectful I don't care about being respectful to Trump, but I do care about being respectful to the monks. And I just think that we would need to follow their lead and not antagonize Trump and just keep the focus on the monks and not on Trump. Because if you make a fuss, he's just going to make it all about himself. So that's my 2 cents. Thank you.
He'll do that regardless. Everything is always about.
True.
I'll tell you what, because that was a very unusual and unlikely thought experiment, I'd prefer if we can turn to any questions or comments you might have about our advocacy, our organizing, our education. And I know this is kind of an interesting thing to think about, and I put it on the table, but I don't want to keep talking about that.
Okay.
Well, John, I'm going to let John unmute. I don't know if that's, but he's been in line, so go ahead, John.
A couple of things. One, you mentioned that Trump's mental illness, narcissism, whatever. There's this question of, what is the course of narcissism of someone who's way out on the bell curve when they are surrounded by people who are genuflecting to them constantly, in constant genuflection. And another thing, I've raised this elsewhere, and I don't really know that there's need to say anything beyond what I say, that there's another piece of the nonviolence thing, and that's the model of Dietrich Bonhoeffer. Dietrich Bonhoeffer was a Lutheran pastor during the Third Reich. He decided he was a pacifist. He was a deeply devout man, and he decided to participate in an assassination plot, and he was assassinated for his deed. And I don't know what to say beyond that, but that's a piece of this mix somehow. And I don't know what, I guess I don't really want to say anything more than that.
All right,
Thank you.
John.
Very interesting.
Yeah, you've really opened up quite a conversation here, Kevin. What is nonviolence? I've actually been reading some Gandhi, and I'll tell you one of what he actually said, that if you do nothing, that is not nonviolence. Standing between violence and those, receiving it, that's nonviolence. So there's a lot of room to discuss and think. That's why we're doing our book study. right now on This is an Uprising, so we can get into those questions and talk about them and think them through. And it is a great moment to be exploring that, one of the exciting developments of our time. All right, what else? What have we gotten here? Okay, Bill. And hopefully this is on something else, because Kevin would like a broader question. Right?
Well, I just put a comment about Iran. That really is the issue du jour, especially with Netanyahu coming to town again. I consider myself a dissident Quaker because I believe in peace through strength, and I think Iran is a sterling example of that. According to the YouTube experts that I listen to, former defense officials, CIA, Scott Ritter, the Iranian scholar. The strength of Iran is what has stopped Israel. I think that's incredible. I think we should study that. And I wondered what Kevin thinks about that.
Well, I have complicated thoughts about that. So Peace Action has been working for peace with Iran since the early 2000s. So basically at the end of the Iraq War. And one of the only good things that George W. Bush did, he denied Cheney. Dick Cheney wanted the United States to attack Iran back then. That was one of the very few good things, I guess, also with lowering the price of AIDS drugs in Africa. Two good things that George W. Bush did. And the people that I know who've been to Iran, and I have a lot of Iranian American friends and colleagues. I've not been to Iran. I had a chance to go and I didn't go, but a lot of other Peace Action folks did, including a former colleague of mine who has been to 35 countries. And he said that the people of Iran were the most gracious, welcoming hosts that he's ever experienced in going to over 35 countries, and so have others. And of course, it's a very pro-Western country. After 9/11, there were spontaneous rallies of support for the United States after the 9/11 attacks. And also in Iran, there's an abhorrence of weapons of mass destruction because of what they experienced in the Iran-Iraq War and the chemical weapons attacks. So at the same time, Iran does have, shall we say, ambitions in the region. And in terms of the current conflict with Israel, in the so-called 12-day war that was last June, there's a concern on Israel's part that it doesn't have enough interceptor missiles if Iran were to attack again. And that's why if there is going to be another illegal attack, it may not be against Iran's nuclear facilities, it may be against their missile facilities to degrade their ability to attack Israel. I don't want anybody to bomb anybody. I'm for abolishing everything above super soakers. That's my position. Nobody should bomb nobody, right? However, Iran's attacks or counterattacks against Israel have been relatively restrained, especially when you compare that to the illegal Israeli and U.S. attacks on its nuclear facilities. Now, the way to solve all this is a comprehensive peace agreement in the region. And if you go back to the first U.S. war on Iraq, part of the official resolution, according to the United Nations resolution that blessed the end of the first Iraq war, there's supposed to be a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the Middle East. And there have been conferences on that. Of course, Israel generally has not participated, and we haven't made any progress toward that. But the answer to all of this is for Israel to stop the occupation and apartheid and oppression of Palestinians. Whatever that resolution looks like, one state, two state, confederation, I'm not going to dictate. That's not our job to dictate. But then a comprehensive peace agreement in the region, which would include not just a nuclear weapons free zone, but a weapons of mass destruction free zone in the region. So that's what the answer is to all of this. Is all that going to happen in the next week to prevent another illegal attack by the US on Iran? I don't think so. And my understanding is what Netanyahu probably, I'm not going to have ears in the room when they meet tomorrow, but probably what he wants is not another Israeli attack. He wants the United States to attack. But Iran has threatened to retaliate against US forces in the region. So it's a very dangerous dance that the three parties are engaged in right now. And the solution is for nobody to bomb nobody and to get to the negotiating table on the very important issues to bring about real peace and disarmament and justice in the region.
I do think you mean nobody to bomb anybody.
Yeah. Sometimes I overly double negative. Nobody should be bombing
where
anybody.
you went with that. Yeah. Thanks, Kevin. That makes a lot of sense. Now, okay, here's one from Chris. I've got one too, but let's do this. What specific campaigns has Peace Action set in motion to end the violence in Sudan and Ukraine?
Not a whole lot, because direct US involvement has not been as prominent as a lot of the other issues that we work on. And one of the things that people don't like to hear me say sometimes, but I'm going to say it anyway, we're the fire department, right? We try to put out the fires we can, and the fires that are most directly being set by the United States. On Sudan, which now is, unfortunately, Sudan has surpassed Yemen and Gaza as the worst humanitarian crisis on earth. In terms of direct US involvement, it's not so much. However, US support generally for both Saudi Arabia and the UAE has been a problem. And for both of those in Yemen, and then particularly for the UAE in Sudan. So we helped amplify, and we signed on to a campaign about that, about ending the violence in Sudan. And one of the main targets I thought was great. I'm a basketball fan, and the NBA has this terrible alliance with the UAE. They have the Emirates Cup, and they have Emirates logos on everything. So there's been a pressure campaign against the NBA, the National Basketball Association, for it to divest of its corporate underwriting by the UAE. So that fits in the broader realm of BDS organizing, boycott, divestment, sanctions, which of course has mostly been done in the Israel-Palestine realm. But this, fits in with that too. And certainly for years, we were part of the coalition that did a lot of work to bring about an end to the hostilities in Yemen, where the United States, of course, was supporting both Saudi Arabia and UAE with weapons and with refueling and intelligence, et cetera. The situation in Sudan is horrible. And I think even just raising awareness about that is important. In terms of Ukraine, there is just this bizarre Trump-Putin bromance. There is the threat that it could become much worse. Certainly the people of Ukraine don't want a third of their country gobbled up, including Russian demands for territory that they haven't taken yet. But that's up to the people of Ukraine as to what concessions they may or may not be willing to accept. So again, I think it's been very difficult, even for the peace forces in this country, other than generally supporting negotiations and an end to the war. It's been very difficult for us to come up with a very solid advocacy campaign that has any traction, unlike a lot of the other issues that we work on. And that may be an unsatisfactory answer, but it is sort of a political realist answer.
Thanks, Kevin. And I appreciate your laying that out. I do want to bring in Kat's question, which is similar to what mine is. She was saying, how do we get Shaheen and Hassan to get on board? I think that's around, well, I'm not sure what that's around, but what I will say, I think it was around Israel, maybe. What I will do is expand.
The Iran War Powers Resolution.
You think, okay. And I'm going to expand that to say, here we are in New Hampshire. We have 4 Democratic folks that we send to DC, but they're pretty hawkish. Shaheen has shifted. on Israel and Palestine, more than we ever expected. But the other ones were really struggling to move. So I wonder if you have thoughts about our place in the peace movement and where we can, help leverage or what we can do.
No, that is a very good question. And with Shaheen retiring, the race to succeed her, I think, will be very important. And I hope you all know that we endorsed your former board member for that Senate seat. And that Peace Action, if you go to our webpage, and I can put this in the chat as well, the candidates that we are endorsing in the midterm elections are very strong on Middle East and particularly Israel and Palestine. And just to pat ourselves on the back a little bit, from what I can tell, we're ahead of our colleague organizations that make endorsements. Again, not many peace groups make endorsements. A lot of peace groups stay out of electoral politics. But we don't, and we haven't for a long time. We've been engaged in electoral politics for a long time, going back to the 70s, I think, before there were even PACs. But we do have a PAC, and we are able to endorse, and I think that is a very important race. And I think she's running. Karishma, am I remembering her first name? Mansour, is that her? She's very strong on our issues. And if you look at all the candidates that we've endorsed, there has been for years a disappointing PEP, progressive accept Palestine. That's no longer true, and it shouldn't be true. If you look at the candidates that we're endorsing this year, they're very strong and outspoken and straightforward on their views, particularly on Israel and Palestine, but on the Middle East in general. In terms of Hassan, I mean, yes, she is going to be hard to move. I don't know exactly what her political calculation is. You all would know that better than I would. I don't have high expectation for her. I think she's a follower on these issues. But I think you guys do a great job of lobbying and also your media work and getting letters to the editor published. So I think you're doing what you can. Some of this has to do with political salience of issues among voters, but also among members of Congress. What do they consider to be their highest priorities, et cetera? But the thing is, there's increasingly little risk for Democrats to take a more positive, progressive, assertive position on Middle East issues, and particularly Israel and Palestine. I'm going to post in the chat the link to our endorsements, so you can see the terrific candidates around the country. And also, some of you may have been on our Meet the Candidates Zooms, where we have candidates come on and make a statement and answer questions. I hope you'll be able to join us in the future. I think we've done 5 or 6 already in this cycle, and we'll be doing more this year.
Thanks. I do think, it's particularly important in this state because Shaheen has been such a foreign policy focused legislator, that we stay with that as long as we have her there, and keep pushing. And we'll see how much more we can, get her to move. I'm trying to see here. These are more comments. Well, how about I'll build on this one. Someone is saying how the problem is the party sticking to most likely to get elected candidates. I think personally what we're seeing, at least, again, I'm a little unsure if this is about Israel or Iran, is it's not necessarily the case anymore. That actually
it's changing. The political space has shifted in our favor because of our hard work, but also it took a genocide, right? It took a horrific genocide supported by both Biden and accelerated by Trump. But the political space has shifted our way on these issues. So I can see if you're a Senate candidate in a really deeply red state, you feel like you have to run to the middle to get elected, I can swallow that. And that matters because if the Democrats then do, and of course we're officially nonpartisan, but if the Democrats get back the House and or the Senate, they have the committee chair, seats, and they can push legislation, they can hold hearings. It'd be a lot better to have Bernie Sanders as the chair of the banking committee than whoever the heck Republican is, right? And the same on most issues. So even though we are officially nonpartisan and we support people who support peace and justice, the partisan calculation does matter. So yeah, I'd be in favor of some centrist, middle of the road person who doesn't necessarily embody all of our issues getting elected from a red state. We need that.
Yeah. Thanks. Let's see what else we have here. Any other questions? It's good to see folks continue to have thoughts that are in the chat. Most of these aren't really questions though. All right, maybe not. We are getting very close to the end anyway. Kevin, thank you so much for joining us. Always good to hear from you and really appreciate. And again, having been in the last couple national meetings, I know there was a lot of information that you condensed down. So thanks for doing that and for giving us this overview. It's really, really helpful. Okay. So I have a few things to tell folks and things to put in the chat. The series is free, but we welcome and need your support. So nhpeaceaction.org/donate is where you can go to support us financially. I also put in there in the chat nhpeaceaction.org and peaceaction.org. It's where you can go to follow what both New Hampshire and National Peace Action are up to. And I will tell you a few things that we have coming up. Actually, our February calendar is like packed. So we have tons of stuff coming up. And let me just say a few of them. Our vigils for a just peace for Palestine continue. Wednesday, February 11, 2 to 3, we're outside Rep. Pappas's office or up the street from his office in Dover. Thursday, February 12th, noon to 1 at City Plaza in Concord. Wednesday, February 18th, 2 to 3, we're at Shaheen's office in Dover. Other programs, tomorrow night, Tuesday, February 10th at 7 p.m., doors opening at 6:30, the film The Settlers about the West Bank will play at Red River Theater in Concord and will be followed up with a Q&A facilitated by members of Not in My Name, New Hampshire. On Wednesday, February 11, 2 days from today, 7 p.m., we are welcoming Joseph Gerson. We have a 3-part series we're doing this winter on global power dynamics. These are going to be hour-and-a-half long sessions for a deeper dive. Joseph will start us off on Wednesday by looking at U.S.-Russia relations. Our next peace and justice conversation on Zoom is Monday, February 23rd. I seem to want to say September. February 23rd, 7 p.m. And we are going to be hearing from someone in the rising generation of peace activists in this country. So with all that said, thanks again to all of you for coming, and please join me in a visible thank you to Kevin, who we were just so happy to have with us. Thank you, Kevin.
Thanks to all of you, your support for New Hampshire Peace Action and National Peace Action. I really do appreciate it.